Hey everybody, my name is Robert Espinoza, and in this presentation I will be talking about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, more commonly known as North Korea. North Korea is a land of contrasting people. This is evident in a quote by Kim Il-sung stating, "The oppressed peoples can liberate themselves only through struggle. This is a simple and clear truth confirmed by history." As opposed to North Korean defector Yeonmi Park, and she says, "They need to control you through your emotions, making you a slave to the state by destroying your individuality and your ability to react to situations based on your own experience of the world." North Korea in itself is a nation forged through conflict. Though its history expands thousands of years, I'm going to begin with the three kingdoms of Korea, beginning in 918 by the Kingdom of Goryeo, followed by Joseon, and then lastly, the Korean Empire. The fall of the Korean Empire was marked by the Japanese occupation and annexation of Korea, in which they named their new province Joseon. And during that time, the future founder Kim Il-sung was born in 1912. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the people of Korea established the Provisional Government of the People's Republic of Korea. However, after the war, that was dismantled, and the South was eventually occupied by the United States, and the North by the Soviet Union. Then, in September 9th, 1948, North Korea was established. And in 1950 to 1953, the Korean War was fought. North Korea invaded the South, and during the war was eventually ended with an armistice and a ceasefire at the 38th parallel, the demilitarized zone, which still exists to this day. In 1955, Juche was established. I'll cover that in a later slide. So North Korea is located in East Asia. It is bordered to the south by South Korea, to the northwest by China, and a sliver to the northeast by Russia. To the west, the Yellow Sea, and to the east, the Sea of Japan, and across the Sea of Japan, the country of Japan itself. The physical boundaries include the Tumen River in the northeast and the Yalu River in the northwest, with the demilitarized zone separating the north and south. It is also the most militarized place in the world. As North Korea is a mountainous country, the tallest point is Mount Paektu, and this place too is a significant cultural area for all Koreans, and it straddles the border of China and North Korea. North Korea is populated by roughly 26 million people as of this year, and the capital city and largest city is Pyongyang. The current GDP per capita is $1,700 as of 2015. That is compared to $31,000 for the South. The current makeup of the citizens is about 99.9% ethnically Korean. However, the 0.1% that aren't Korean are either Chinese or Japanese descendants, with a small population of about 200 Americans who had defected during the Korean War. About 25.6% unemployment rate, and the current leader is Kim Jong-un, the grandson of Kim Il-sung. Its government is a single-party state, with the Korean Workers' Party being the sole party of power within the country. It also has a centralized form of economy. Currently, there are roughly about 150,000 to 200,000 political prisoners that are housed in North Korean prison camps. Sunbun is the current caste system for those living in the north. They are divided up into three main castes. However, there are roughly about 50 subdivisions, but for the sake of this presentation, I will only cover the three more prominent ones. The first is the core class, which makes up 28% of the population, and these people are professional revolutionaries, descendants of Korean War veterans, as well as those that opposed Japanese occupation prior to the surrender of Japan, as well as the peasantry. The core group are ones that are extremely loyal to the Kim family. The wavering class makes up about 45% of the population, and they consist of people who had previously lived in South Korea and China prior to the Korean War, relatives of defectors prior to the Korean War, as well as intellectuals and merchants. Lastly, the hostile class, which makes up about 27% of the population, and they're descendants of landlords and Japanese sympathizers, religious people, and political prisoners. The hostile class are deemed the most unloyal to the Kim regime, and a lot of them end up going to prison camps. Knowing Sunbun's importance is because it hugely affects a citizen's food supply. And speaking about food, North Korean cuisine and foodways. Before we move on to the actual cuisine, I want to talk about how North Korea produces its own food. Currently, due to the inefficiencies of North Korea agriculture, a lot of agriculture is performed by hand. Due to this, food yields are not as high as they would be with modern machinery, and even machinery that North Koreans do use is very antiquated and not fit for the job. Because of that, manual labor is the primary mode of agriculture, and due to current import sanctions, are unable to acquire fertilizer. Thus, the government has implemented policies in which human dung is used as fertilizer and is collected from all citizens within the country. Aside from government policies that affect crop yield, natural disasters such as drought, flooding, and various other forms of natural disasters have affected food yield within the country. This has led to many famines, with the most prevalent being the arduous March famine of the 1990s, which killed roughly about 600,000 people to about 2 million North Koreans. The estimate, give or takes, depending on the source. The only bright side about this is that illegal black marketplaces became prevalent throughout the country, as this was the only way that North Koreans were able to acquire food, as the government was unable to provide and supply food to its citizens. Though capitalistic in nature, these markets were tolerated by the centralist government, as it was the only way for people to get food. However, as time went on, the government began taxing merchants at these markets. So, despite them being a centralized government, they do have some form of capitalism in regards to marketplaces. Some of the foods that North Koreans eat happen to be rice porridge, which is a staple for most breakfasts across the country. Another would be cold noodle soup or buckwheat soup. Another is dog meat soup, which, as implied, it is made with dog meat and is a traditional food of the Korean people. It is still eaten by a small percentage of people in the South as well. However, it is very stigmatized by a lot of animal rights activists. Recently, the Kim regime made policies that all citizens were to surrender their pets to be used for food for their military, as well as distribution to the people, as at the time food crisis was going on. Another staple in North Korean diet is seaweed soup. It is very easy to get, is very cheap, thus is a staple at pretty much every dinner table in North Korea. And it also shows the dire situations in the fact that people have resorted to cooking seaweed, though it is technically a traditional meal. Lastly is kimchi, which is fermented cabbage, which is a traditional Korean dish and is actually recognized by UNESCO as a heritage cuisine that defines the Korean people. Lastly, if you guys didn't know, the North Korean regime has mentioned that Kim Jong-il was the creator of the hamburgers. If you believe this or not, it's up to you. North Korea does partake in some form of globalism, though on a very limited scale. North Korea does export its cuisine to various countries, one being China, and a few others include Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, in which they do serve traditional Korean meals, which kind of contradicts the food crisis that's currently going on in the North at the moment. These restaurants are used as a form of cultural diplomacy, in which they are trying to promote the regime through the use of cuisine. And all the restaurants are currently owned by the North Korean government as a way to produce revenue for the Kim family. Ironically enough, North Korean defectors who live in the South, being unsatisfied by the food that's being served in the South, have actually opened up their own chain of restaurants that serve traditional North Korean meals, with about 50 restaurants currently open in the country and currently expanding to other countries such as Tokyo, Japan, and Los Angeles, surprisingly. So this demonstrates that North Korean cuisine is permeating to other cultures, and the fact that North and South Korea both share similar cuisine, if not identical cuisine, proves that there are some form of globalism going on in regards to bringing food across the country, or across the world, I'm sorry. So religion in North Korea is a little bit complicated. Traditionally, the religions were Confucianism, Buddhism, shamanism, and Chandism, which is a form of shamanism. Shamanism in North Korea is similar to Shintoism in Japan, in which people worshipped objects and associated spirits with these objects. Though the country is considered atheist, a lot of people still practice these prior religions, either in secret or just tolerated by the regime. However, religions such as Protestantism, Catholicism, and Russian Orthodox are prohibited. However, there are a few churches located within the country for these denominations, however, are seen as facades to give the illusion of religious freedoms. What's also ironic is that the North Korean Constitution guarantees religious freedoms, though it doesn't practice it at all. What could be considered religion within the country, however, would be the ideology of Juche. So Juche is loosely translated to self-reliance, and it is a socio-economic ideology in which all facets of the government are to be self-reliant on itself as opposed to outside intervention. What makes Juche similar to a religion is that it shares quite a bit of characteristics of what religions normally do. One would be the worship of some sort of deity, this deity being the cult of personality surrounding the Kim family, especially the past leaders of Kim Il sung and Kim Jong il. Another aspect would be rituals, one being the Arirang Mass Games, which is a demonstration of regime loyalty and loyalty to the Kim family. And lastly, it promotes a form of patriarchy in which the love from the eternal leaders are the most supreme feeling that you can get, and they are the most revered people within the country because of their supposed fatherly love to their people. Next, the Korean language. North Korea speaks Korean. However, there are two forms of how Korean is called. In the north, the language itself is called Chosunmal, while in the south, Hanggujo. The actual handwriting in the north is called Chosungul, while in the south, it is Hangul. There are minor differences in how things are spelt. However, they're very difficult to describe as they involve syllables and whatnot regarding how things are sounded and how things are written. So due to the current situation and current split of North and South at the 38th parallel, several dialects of the Korean language have been established. In the South, the Seoul dialect is mainly spoken, and in the North, the Pyongyang dialect is spoken. These dialects can also be divided into several sub-dialects that are distinctive depending on the region of which the speaker is living. However, those in the South would say that the North has a very strong and tough dialect and is considered fairly old-fashioned as compared to the dialect spoken in the South, which incorporates a lot of words from foreign languages as well. In the North, those are prohibited. So the North believes that their version of the language is the correct version. This is because of policies controlled by the government that dictate the linguistics of the Korean language. Words of foreign origin, or terms that are used in foreign countries, are strictly forbidden as to maintain a form of purity to the language. The language in itself is used for propaganda purposes and is used to promote the superiority of the northern regime as opposed to the south. So, Songun is the policy of military first. It ensures that the military is part of the government and is integral to the formation of that government. The primary economic focus of the country is to support its military. Currently, its military is one of the largest in the world, though in regards to its impact, no one knows for sure. However, they do use a lot of old equipment as well as old tactics of warfare. What makes this culturally significant is that service is mandatory by all citizens of the country, beginning at the age of 17. Males serve for roughly 10 years, while females serve for 3. However, if a citizen is a member of the core Sunbun or Sungbun, yes, then they can opt out and serve only 2 due to their family's connection to the regime, especially if they plan on going to school. And the whole purpose of the military is the defense of the party, as opposed to the defense of the citizens. They're used as a deterrent to ensure that its mortal enemies, the United States and South Korea, will never invade, and they also possess a nuclear stockpile as another form of deterrence. So my final thoughts. North Korea in itself is a very strange country in regards to its political standings and it being an outlier in modern society. However, it is quite sad in the fact that they are essentially the same people as those that live in the South. They share the same cultural identity. They share the same food. Their history is bound. However, at the split of the Korean War, has made the two Koreas very indistinguishable from each other. And I only hope that sometime in the future that they can both reconcile and eventually unify. However, that is all dependent on the citizens of the country as well as the leadership of that country. There's a lot that North Koreans can teach other people based on their experiences living there. As I mentioned, Yeonmi Park is a big influence regarding outreach and awareness to what's happening currently in North Korea. And I encourage anybody to read her book if anyone has the chance to do so. With this being said, I'm going to leave off with a couple of closing quotes. The first being from Yeonmi Park once again. And she goes, "As North Koreans, we were innocent in a way I cannot fully explain." And that makes sense because as a North Korean, you are born into this society, into the current culture that is permeated and exploited by the current regime, in which the citizens don't know any better. So they are innocent because they are not informed of the potential of a better life outside of the country. However, the next quote goes, "There is a different future that is available to North Korea if they choose differently." Now, due to the brainwashing that the North Korean citizens have undergone by the current regime, it's not necessarily the North Korean citizenship that has to choose differently. It's the regime that has to choose differently. And unfortunately, the way it's looking, it's not looking very good. However, I continue to remain optimistic, and I hope that one day the country will be unified once again, similar to how Germany was at the end of the Cold War. So this concludes my presentation. Here are all the references that I used. If you are interested, I would recommend looking up more about North Korea. It's a very unique country compared to those others that are located around the world. It does pique my curiosity regarding how people live there and how the regime is run. It is very interesting. It's sad, however, very interesting. If you have any questions, comments, please leave a comment below. And I look forward to reading what you guys have to say. And I look forward to listening in on other presentations that have been presented in this discussion. All right. So have a good night, everybody. Goodbye.